So welcome to our Adult Maker Kit cookie decorating workshop. I'm Heathella. I'm the Adult Services Librarian for the Salinas Public Library, and I'll be hosting today's event. My fellow librarian Leslie, who's trying to get set up right now, will be the one actually leading us through some basic cookie decorating techniques. So this is meant to be a live and interactive workshop. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to unmute yourself and ask her directly, or you can also type in your question into the chat box, which I'll be monitoring, and I can read them out loud for you.
And like Isela said, anytime you have a question, just jump on in. So I'm going to take a couple of the cookies away. We're going to start with something like this. Now you can choose whatever colors you want. You don't have to do them exactly like this. What I'm really showing you is the techniques. So I am going to bring out a nice fresh cookie here. Fresh in that it's been in my freezer for a couple weeks, but good enough. And I am going to stick to this color palette. I'm going to take my darker pink. It's already tied up in my icing bag. What we want to do is find the seam of that icing bag. There's one seam. There's going to be one little fold and one actual seam. So if you could see on this one, I have the seam pointing straight up. We want to pinch the end with that seam pressed straight up. And this is what we're going to cut off to let the icing out. Now, you want to start with a small hole. Obviously, the larger the hole, the more icing is going to come out. You want to have it small enough that you can control it and do a thin line, but large enough that you can get some icing out. So I am going to cut probably about 2 or 3 millimeters off of that. Just going to snip it with scissors straight across. And it went flying somewhere. So then if you press on your bag, you should be getting some icing out. The way to hold these is to just open your palm and wrap it around the icing bag. Sometimes you can also hook your fingers under the knot, or sometimes I use a bag clip instead, and that gives me a nice resting place for my fingers. But again, the thumb and forefinger just wrap around the top, and the rest of your fingers squeeze. You control the amount of icing that comes out by how hard you squeeze. On this first cookie, we're going to flood or color the whole thing in whatever color you've chosen. Flooding is what it means when we just kind of let the icing flood or melt down in the cookie. We want to try to do, first of all, an outline, and then we'll follow that with some more icing. Now, it's a little bit odd to get the feel of this. If you just squeeze and pull it, see how it's all curling? Or maybe if your line is smaller, if your hole, is smaller, then it might do the same. So what you want to do is squeeze it and then lift up and let gravity pull the line down. So if I touch, squeeze, and let gravity pull it down, it comes out much straighter. It takes some practice, so if you don't get it right away, no biggie. These are cookies. We're not going to destroy the world if we don't get it quite perfect, but just do what you can and let's see how it goes. We're going to go ahead and outline this cookie with the pink. Another way that you can control it, if you feel like your hand is too far away, if you put the index finger of your non-dominant hand against the bottom, about 1 inch up, that'll help you sort of steer it. So let the icing drop down, and around. And you'll notice it isn't quite perfect. That's okay. We're going to move that icing around later with our scribe. So if that didn't feel natural, and it probably didn't, try to lift the icing up a bit more and really let gravity pull it down. If I try to actually draw a straight line, see how wiggly it comes out? I don't have that kind of fine motor control. It's much easier to let the weight of it pull the icing down. So once we do have that outline, we want to go ahead and fill in or flood the rest of the cookie. You can tip your icing bag up a little straighter, and here you can push a lot harder and let more icing come out. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. We don't have to cover every single inch of it, we are going to be using our scribe to move that icing around to just where we want it. So just squeeze it and let that icing come out. Gisela, are you decorating along with us too?
Yep, I am.
All right. So because I don't have my other iPad working, I can't see how you guys are doing. So just talk through it. So when it is all flooded in, and again, you'll see there are areas that aren't quite in, we're going to take our scribe tool and we're going to use this to move the icing around. See how I have a big opening there? I'm just going to squiggle that scribe in there. When you move the scribe, you don't want to touch all the way down to the surface of the cookie. You want to work in the icing, but not as far down as the cookie. And if you see here that I haven't reached the edges, I can just pull this out with my scribe and then even it up in a minute. So I'm just doing little circles, pulling that icing right to the very edge. I'm going to turn my cookie around to get a better angle for the other side. And just moving that scribe, getting the feel for it until you're kind of happy with how everything is covered. At this point, you might see that there are some little dents. What that would mean is that there was an area that you didn't have as much icing on. So you can just go back and basically do a little cookie Botox and just stick a little bit more on there. It's going to go ahead and melt on in with the rest of the icing. It won't look like a big blob once it's done. Again, I'm just going to pull to the edges. When you are satisfied with how that's looking, then we're going to go ahead and give the cookie a shake. This will really help the icing to settle down and smooth out. So I'm just going to grab the sides of it, shake it back and forth, and you can already see that it's starting to even out. You also see where I just stuck my fingers in the cookie, and I do that all the time, unfortunately. I usually end up sticking a sleeve in it or, you know, whatever else is around. Let me know when you guys have caught up to this one. How are you doing, Lucinda?
Great, thank you.
All right. So once we've got this on here, the techniques that we're doing tonight are all called wet on wet, meaning that we're putting new icing onto icing that is still wet. That's how we're going to get this smooth look. Sometimes with cookies, or more often with highly detailed cookies, you need to do a whole bunch of different areas and let them dry before you do any areas adjacent. But that would take way too long. So we're going to do these wet on wet techniques that we can do all at once. So what we're going to do now is just add in some dots. I've cut open my red. Same idea. You want to find that seam. Make sure the seam is pointing straight up. Smooth the edges down, just kind of flatten them out. My icing is already open, so I don't want to run my fingers along there because I will make it squeeze out. And then just go ahead and straight across, just clip the end of the piping bag. And then we hold on to it by putting it on top of your hand, wrapping your index finger and thumb around the top of it, and then just putting the rest of your fingers around. And now what we're going to do is just go in and put some dots randomly. Just set them in there. They don't have to be exactly circular because they are going to sink down into the icing and spread out a bit. And you might want to make them different sizes. This one I had the red dots were pretty big. I think I'm going to go back and make mine a little bit bigger. And it is really nice to do these wet on wet designs that you can do the whole cookie in 10 minutes or less when you get fast at it, as opposed to the ones that have to dry in between colors where it can take several hours to get one cookie done. All right, so I'm going to give that a shake again. I'm not really going to use the scribe. I don't need to do anything to these dots unless I wanted to change the shape of them. If you want to change the shape of them, we can put our scribe right in the center of the dot and then pull a line out. Then go to the quarter mark of it, center, pull it out, center, pull it up, center, pull it out. And I don't really know what that shape is, but it's just doing something a little bit different. Now, each time that you put this in, you'll notice I'm just wiping the icing off my scribe so that it's cleaning it up a bit. Up, down, out, out. And if you just want to leave yours dots, go ahead and leave it dots. If you want to add more lines to your shape, making it more like, I don't know, what if we make it like a sunshine? Or I guess that's a starburst. Or maybe it's an octopus. Who knows? There you go. All right, I think that one turned into a blob for me. And if you're happy with the way your dots are, you can go ahead and layer another dot right on top. I'm going to put pink in the center. Go ahead and open my pink, seam up, pinch the end to flatten it, take scissors and cut straight across. And now I'm going to go back and just stick a pink dot in all of my red bursts or whatever they are. Play with some more of mine. See what happens if I pull the white out. Oh, missed. How's it going?
It's good. We're just playing around with shapes.
Okay. I'm like, either I've lost you and you're just so into it and concentrating, or my Wi-Fi went down.
Definitely the concentrating.
Excellent. I find that doing these cookies is one of the few times that I get completely out of my head and I just don't even think about anything. I just get lost in the cookies. It's been a very good hobby to have during the pandemic. For me, it satisfies that need to be creative, and yet what it's creating is something that most of the time people will love to have. You don't need to find a place to put a cookie. You don't need to match it to your decor. You just have to eat it. And then I'm going to go back and just put in some very small white dots in between there. So just barely touching it down into the icing. So this is a little different from the one that I did as a demo cookie, but I just thought we'd have a little bit of fun playing with it. I wanted to show you something else that you could do. I'm going to see if I could put a little white dot in my little starburst things too. Now, I always keep a wet paper towel handy. When I pick up another color to use it again, so when I'm going to use the pink again, because the icing has been collecting at the tip, it might have dried a bit, and we don't want that to interrupt the flow of the icing. So I'll just put it on my paper towel and pull down. And then you see that I've just removed all of the icing from the very tip. So now it will be fresh as it comes down. I'll tell you what, when we're done, when we've done all four, everybody will have to show their cookies, or at least show the one that you want to show if you don't want to show all of them, but I think they're going to be good. All right, so just let me know when you're finished with that one and we will move on to our next cookie. And I definitely think that the hardest part is mixing the icing and getting it to the right consistency. If your icing is too thick, it won't smooth out and flood, but if it's too thin, it'll run right off the sides of your cookie. If you can get your consistencies down, you can do anything with your cookies. All right, so the next one we're going to do is this white one with red and pink hearts. And if you remember that we just used our scribe to make shapes, that is what we're going to do to make those hearts there. But first of all, we have to flood our cookie in the white icing. And I just noticed I have a little chunk out of mine there, but it will be covered up by the icing. And this brown mark, I use vanilla bean paste instead of extract, and so it will often have the little dots that will bleed like this, but again, it gets covered up by your icing. So you probably already have your white open if you used it for any of your dots. So we're doing, go ahead and grab it, put that thumb and forefinger around, the rest of your fingers securely around it, and we're going to do our outline again. Now, remember to lift the icing bag up and let gravity and the weight of the icing pull down. You can help yourself by directing with your forefinger about an inch above the piping tip, or you can do it without that, whichever you feel most comfortable with. So here we go. We're gonna do our outline. And I will say that when I first started doing this and I saw people just whip around on that outline, and I was there going little bit by little bit, I was like, oh my gosh, how did they do that? But time and practice will make you better at everything. Generally, once you start flooding, you work from the outside in, depending on your shape. You can do sections of it. Like I might say, oh, I want to do this section of the heart first. So I'm just going to go around in here, and then I'll move over to the other side. You can go back and forth. You can go around. The idea is to just get an even layer of icing, or as close to even as you can, across the whole cookie. And remember, we can even that out with the scribe once we've laid down the icing. And I'm actually finding that this bag has a fairly small opening, so I might cut it open a little bit more, or I might just squeeze harder. All right, so I see a couple areas that look a little lighter to me, meaning that there's not as much icing. Add those in. And then I'm going to go to my scribe and just move that icing around. I'm going to clean off my scribe because I know it was in the red and the pink. So just gently move it around. I see I have a little air bubble here, and we want to go ahead and pop that and then just squiggle the icing around. If you get air bubbles, what will happen is that you'll end up with a little crater in your cookie, just a little divot. It's not the end of the world, but you know, if we can see them and pop them before it turns into that, then you should do that. And I like to take my icing all the way to the very edge of a cookie, but that's a personal decision. Some people like to leave basically a border of open cookie. Totally up to you. Figure out what your style is. All right, now I just had a little bit of icing go over the side of my cookie. So what I did, let me push them over first. So if you've got icing down the side and you want to clean it up, put your scribe pointing straight up and just run along the edge of the cookie. And you see how it pulled that off? That's the way to clean up anything that dips over the side. I think my white icing has ended up being a little thin. This is icing that I mixed up a couple weeks ago and then had in the freezer. So I probably should have maybe remixed it, but it'll work.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So I got a little bit ahead and I started trying to make the lines.
Uh-huh.
Come across this issue of I get this big dot right where I start and then the line thins out. Do you have any tips on how to avoid that?
Yes. Make sure that you're squeezing evenly, but actually as you start and as you end, you have to let up on your pressure a little bit. You also want to make sure that your tip is very clean before you start. So clean that tip. Get ready to squeeze. Oh, wait, how are we doing it? And then make sure that you are lifting it up. The other thing is, if you do have a blob, and you're going to get some, this is another time to just use that scribe and even it out. Okay. Making these lines, this is where you really have to think about letting the icing fall down. There is very little likelihood that anybody could do a straight, super straight line if you're moving your hand with the bag. You need to lift it up and let that icing fall. Another thing is, if you're doing stripes like this, you can go over the edge. Oops, I missed. Oh, and I had a little blurb. But if you start over the edge, and then you can just wipe it away from on your mat that you're decorating on. Mine is really too thin, but I'm gonna get another tool just to scrape up that stuff that I put on there. Okay. So there you go. I've got nice uneven lines. I'm going for an abstract look. And basically we're going to use that wet on wet technique again that we did with the star, or with the little dots. We are going to alternate or use the same color, put small dots between each section of lines. You can do it one color, you can do it two colors, whatever you want to do. Just put small dots. Make sure that you don't get too many in each section. You don't want these to be too close because these are going to end up being hearts, little heart shapes. And then once you've done one color and you're choosing to do two different colors, go ahead and alternate and do the other one. And these are just little dots of the icing, just to push and release your pressure. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, release. We're going to be using the scribe through the dot again. So we're going to make sure that we're wiping off that scribe each time. To do the heart shape, you put your scribe in just a couple millimeters above the circle and then pull down and lift it up. So above the circle, slide it down and scrape it off. Above the circle, slide down, clean it off. Above, straight down, and clean. Okay, you probably don't need me to say that another 20 times, so I'll just let you guys go through with that. Remember, if you have any questions, ask away. Oh, I made a funny right there. I think that one looks more like a comma, a reverse comma. All right, my white definitely needs to be thickened up if I'm going to use it again. I'm going to go rinse off my little paper towel here. I have this really nifty, I think it's called a Swedish paper towel. It's completely reusable and washable. It is perfect for this. Okay, let's see if I can repair this funky little heart that I made. Better. How do you like using the scribe to make these shapes?
It's harder than I thought.
Isn't everything always harder than you thought? Do you mean the control of the scribe?
It's more like you can't really see the top of my heart. Like it kind of looks like a teardrop shape rather than a heart shape.
Okay, yeah. And so you could change that with your icing, with how far down you bring it in the center point of the heart. I'm pretty sure we have the exact same cutter though, right? Did it start out looking like a heart and it was just the icing?
I think it took me so long to fill up my white base that by the time I started drawing the hearts on the far left, it already started getting a little crusty.
Ah, okay. So then what you could do is, oh, you mean the base was crusty? Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, that's just going to be a matter of practice that you know, you will definitely get faster at flooding for sure. I have this little scrapey tool, which is, I don't know, it's called a boo-boo stick. Because if you really don't like what you put on a cookie, you do this. You're watching this? Nope, don't like it. I'm starting over. So nothing is irreparable. If you don't like it, take off the icing and try again.
That's cool.
So the boo-boo tool is nice for this. And I mean, you don't always make big boo-boos. Sometimes it's just a little area that you want to try. But I use this mostly to clean up my work area. You can scoop this icing right off anything that's just been sitting down there, and that way it won't get on your next cookie. So there we go. Now I feel like I have to finish scraping this one. There we go. It's back to being almost a naked cookie. Let me know when you guys are ready to move on to the next one. I will probably just go back and decorate this guy again just for the fun of it.
We're ready.
Ready?
Alrighty. All right, I'm gonna get rid of my naked cookie. And we're gonna move on to our little striped guy. Kind of like an ombre effect, just using our different icings from light to dark. This will give us a bit more practice of doing smaller amounts, and you'll probably like this more than flooding the whole cookie. It just feels like you're making some progress on it as you go along. Now in this one, I did horizontal stripes. You can choose to do vertical, or you can try diagonal, whatever you'd like to do. Just decide before you start so you know what you're doing to your cookie. I'm gonna try, I actually think I'm gonna do a diagonal on this one. No, I'm changing my mind. I'm gonna do horizontal just because I think it might be easier for you to see. So I'm gonna start with my darkest color. Again, whatever you wanna do. I'm gonna look at this cookie. Since I know I'm dividing it into 4 pieces, I can look for center and then divide from there. You can actually use your scribe to give yourself some guidance lines on your cookie. So I can just kind of gently push it into the cookie. Let me lift that up and see. Can you see the line where I just scraped across?
Yes. Yes.
And you don't have to do this. If you like eyeballing things better, go for it. But if you want to give yourself a little guidance line, then go ahead and etch those in. Again, they're not going to be seen as soon as we put icing on. So it's just there to give us a little help. All right, and now we're going to outline just the first part that we're doing. So instead of doing the whole cookie, we're just gonna take this shape, go around the top of the heart, and then right across that line. And then we're gonna go back and flood in that part. Play around with how much pressure you're putting on the bag and see just how much icing you can get out at one time. It's really quite a difference between what you get when you're just piping or when you're really pushing it to get that deep flood. And then you're gonna wanna go back and smooth section by section. If you waited till the end, there might be a little bit of crusting over. And we don't want that, do we? And I see I brought my line down too low, so I'm just gonna pull this out with my scribe. Give it a little shake. See if everything's settling in. All right. And once you're happy with that, move on to your next color. Now, we're putting the colors of the wet icing right next to each other, so they're going to blend in and dry smoothly. If we wanted these to look very much separated, we would have to do the red and the light pink and leave these 2 sections empty, allowing the first colors to dry. Then when these were dry, we could go back and do the medium pink and the white, and you would have a really nice delineation or separation between those sections. But we are going to try to get the ombre look, so we want them to be nice and blended in a way. So I'm going to go on with my next color. And flood that in. I actually think this one is one of my favorites out of these. Well, I know, I think it is my favorite out of these. I really like the way the colors blend in. And that is likely due to the fact that we were just adding more and more of the same color of coloring gel to it. So they're really all very much related because they're just hues of the same color. I think I have a different pink here that I used. This is one that I did with a different, I actually used a pink coloring as opposed to less red. And it just looks more like a baby pink. I quite like these. They're a little more muted. They appeal to me. Sometimes I actually stick the tip of the piping bag right down partway into the icing too to move it around like that. Why not? Just make sure that you clean off the tip once you've done that. I'm gonna open my other bag of white here since the other one I had was too runny. And I'll be able to use that other white again by taking it out of the bag, mixing it with a bit of fresh icing or with a bit more powdered sugar, and then it will be good to go again. I definitely reuse my icing. As I said, I can keep it in the fridge or the freezer. When I do reuse it, I like to mix it with some fresh too. Just a little bit, it doesn't need to be a lot. And there we go. I really like the way these colors just kind of blend a little bit together. I did some other ones on the weekend with a friend of mine, and I actually tried to feather the colors a bit. And to do that, I just took my scribe and just sort of went back and forth right on the seam of it. Just to sort of make it look a little blurred or feathered. Let's get our last one. Move this up here. The last one looks pretty complicated, doesn't it? It's not so bad. We're going to be making use of that scribe again and to get that fancy pattern. But it's also difficult because we're going to do smaller lines of each color. Now, we started off with flooding the whole cookie in one color, whole cookie in one color. We just did some smaller sections. Now we're going to get even smaller. You know what? I'm going to bring this one back that I scraped off. What we're going to do with this is do single lines of each color. Now you can decide to do 2, 3, or 4 colors. I did all 4 in here. As you can see when you look at it, we've got the white, the light pink, the dark pink, and the red. You might also notice that my lines, can you see where the actual line is? And that is a diagonal line. You can choose to do it horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. I'm going to do just like I did on here, and I will do the diagonal. And what we're going to do with this, we're going to be using all 4 bags of icing. We are going to do a small stripe, basically just a couple millimeters thick of each color all the way across the cookie. Now they don't have to come exactly to the edge or exactly touch, but you want them to be very close. Here I have a small dot where it's not right next to each other. That's okay, but I wouldn't want to leave I wouldn't want to leave this much space between. Oh, have I got it in the right place? You want to really make sure that they're butting up against each other. So this one is definitely going to be the most time consuming of the cookies we're doing. So just kind of get into your zone and start striping away. This is probably not a cookie that you would want to make 2 dozen of in the exact same way, because it might drive you crazy.
I have a question, Leslie.
Yes, ma'am.
So I've seen online some cookies that have like 3D effects. It looks like they did a base coat and then they added like stripes on top. Could we do that using a flood consistency, or would we need it different?
So this cookie here is another one that I just did on the weekend. This has a white flood and then a pink flood after the white dried. And then these brown, the little chocolates, I don't know if you could see, but they are 3-dimensional. I actually made those with the icing off the cookie and then put them on the cookie. This is what they call a royal icing transfer. This is actually thicker than the thicker than the flood consistency. It wouldn't have to be much thicker than what we have. Let me see. Basically, if you could put it down on your, can you see that dot? Yeah. If you can put it down on the ground, or well, not on the ground, that wouldn't be very good. If you can put it down on a surface and it doesn't spread too much, that once it's dry, you can put on top of a cookie. You could also do, so this cookie over here is dried. I could go ahead and put something on top of it. I don't know if I have colors to do. Well, I mean, I could just do, oops, that's not a good way. I could just do another heart on top of this. It's not going to show up very well. And this would give it a 3-dimensional look. And the reason of the 3D is because the base coat has dried. So now you can actually put it on top. All of the techniques that we have been doing are wet on wet. And that is because if we wanted to do these cookies, you would have to wait for the layers to dry in between.
And how long does it take for the base coat to dry?
To the point that you could start to do something lightly on top of it, probably at least an hour. When I do cookies that are complicated and have lots of layers, I will let one layer dry overnight. Now, when you really get hooked on the cookie habit, like I have, there are tools that you can get to dry them out faster. And that is either you can put a fan on the counter over them, or you can get a dehydrator. So I have a dehydrator because, of course, pandemic really got me into this hobby. So I would do a layer and then put them on this little tray and put them in my dehydrator at the very lowest temperature. And then I could get this dry enough that I could put another layer on top of it very quickly. So have you ever wondered what sprinkles are made out of? Sprinkles or jimmies, or you know, those things that you put on top of ice cream? They're actually just royal icing. So you could make sprinkles using this. Just draw a line of icing, let it dry, and then cut it into pieces. And so basically those the little chocolates that I put on this cookie are just icing that is dried. And I let those dry overnight. Even though I didn't put them in the dehydrator, I just let them sit overnight, and then they were ready to move on to the cookie and embellish a bit. How are the stripes going? It's a little tedious, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's good practice. Look at all the lines you're drawing. I actually think this would be pretty just to leave as it is when it's striped before we do the little wavy effect on it. Shall we move on then? All right. So first of all, I do think this looks really pretty just like that. But if we want to do that feather design, we're going to go back to our handy dandy scribe. To do this, we're going to pull it down all the way across the stripes. You want to go perpendicular to the stripes, whatever direction you made them. Pull down, then go up, then down, then go up. And unlike the hearts where we lifted our scribe up each time, we are leaving it in the icing and just swirling it. Well, not swirling, but going back and forth. So when you're ready, just dive in there. On this cookie, I did quite close. So I would say they're a little bit less than a centimeter apart. You can do wide ones, which will give you fewer of the featherings, or you can do narrow ones, which will give you more feathering. So jump that scribe in there and just go. I think this creates like quite a pretty look, and it looks complicated, but once you get all those stripes down there, it's actually pretty easy. And then you're bound to have a few little bits sticking over the edge. Just go ahead and neaten that up with your scribe. Don't pull it too far because you don't want to pull the pattern out, but you can just pull just little bits down there and then give it a shake if you want to do it. And then there we go. And yes, I stuck my finger in it again. And then when you're done, you get to do show and tell. I'm going to see if I can quickly do this one so I've got a full set. Now I did all of these designs on hearts, but of course any of these can be done on the circles also. Might be kind of fun to see what some of the patterns look like on a circle.
Leslie, I have another question. If we wanted to gift these for Valentine's Day, what store recommendations would you give us?
So you would want to leave them out until they're dried. I would say leave them out on your counter for a good couple of hours yet, and then put them in any kind of sealable container like Tupperware. I just use, I use this type of Gladware, I think it is, just the little plastic containers, and stick them in there. If you've let them dry a couple of hours, make sure when you touch them that they don't bend a little bit, meaning the icing doesn't bend a little bit, because if it does and you stack another cookie on top of it, it will mess up your design. And after all the time that you spent, you don't want to do that. So if you can put them in a larger flat container so that they're not piled on top of each other, that would be even better until they are fully dry. Now they will be fully dry certainly within 12 hours. So you could even leave them out on the counter overnight, provided you don't have any people in your house that are going to come and eat them off your counter. So yes, once they're fully dry, go ahead and put them in a sealed container. They can go in the fridge or not. It's not going to change the texture of them. If you keep them in the fridge, they'll be a little harder if you were to eat them right out of the fridge, but just let them sit at room temperature for a bit and then they'll be fine. Any other questions? All right, can we have some show and tell?
So there are my cookies.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you.
You got great colors.
Thank you.
Was this your first time decorating?
Yes.
Hey, you're a natural.
Thank you.
So are you going to try it again?
Of course. I made a lot.
Excellent. I'm so glad.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us and playing cookies. That's what I call this, playing cookies.
Alrighty. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the class.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thanks for playing cookies with us.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Come back Thursday and do it again.
Sure. I'll be here. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.